Well, it's good to have you back for another day of Bible study as we are continuing on through our bittersweet study. My name is Kevin. I have the privilege of serving at Christ Table as lead clergy. If you'd like to know more about Christ Table, who we are, what we do among those who are disappointed, discouraged, or done with the church, all you have to do is visit the URL right there, www.christstable.today. Would encourage you when you get there to sign up for the email list so that you'll know everything that's happening around Christ Table. One of the things that I want to make sure that you're also aware of is the fact that we have some resources that go along with this study that are absolutely free for you. You can get those by going to the URL right there at the bottom of the screen, go.christstable.today/bittersweet. You can get a reading plan for the entire study, as well as download a PDF curriculum guide that'll help walk you through that study. And I will say that if you would like a printed curriculum to this study, you can get that there as well. All you got to do is hold it correctly, right side up. All you have to do is click on the button at the top of the screen, the URL right there that says get the box. And we offer, I think I've got one sitting right here. We offer spiritual resource boxes that include this book inside of it. It includes a book by Paul Bloom, which talks about suffering as well and how to deal with suffering and how not all suffering necessarily can be bad. It's a great book. We're actually doing it as a book study, which we'd love to have you be a part of as well. One of the other things that are in there is some other fun things that go along with it. In fact, at the URL, you'll get a list of all those things that are there. So take advantage of that if it's helpful to you, but at least download the resources that are free so that you can be a part of this study with us as we continue forward. One other thing that I want to make sure that you're aware of, this book, Reconstructing Faith, a couple of months old. Would love to put it in your hands. You can find out more about it by going to drkevinyoung.com. If you know somebody or are somebody who is disappointed, disillusioned, done with the church, then that book may be helpful to you as you navigate through your doubts. So today in the study, we're continuing on in 1 Peter chapter 1. We're just walking verse by verse through the entire book of 1 Peter. We find ourselves today on day 3 in verses 8 and 9. Now, one of the things that we have already talked about in the previous days, if you've not been with us, is that 1 Peter deals with suffering. And oftentimes, if you're like me, whenever you have engaged with a church community, you've listened to a pastor, maybe online or in person, or talked to other Christians, whenever the topic of suffering comes up, it can be difficult to swallow the ideas and the things about suffering, because by and large, a lot of Christians translate everything that happens in their life that's bad to them or even mildly disconcerting as being suffering. And that can be insufferable whenever Christians talk, think, or act that way. In fact, one of the things that we've kind of discussed is the fact that here in US America, at least, really the idea of suffering within Christianity is very difficult, honestly, to say that Christians suffer. Christians are far and away the majority religion. Christians are far and away the majority in leadership in our nation. Far and away, most of the decisions that are made with laws and in judgments are made according to Christian practices or ethics. And so we are the insiders and other people are the outsiders. And so it may well be that it's easier for us to understand 1 Peter if we look through the lens of other people who are not Christians, if you're a part of this study through residents living in the United States. So whenever we come to Peter, we have to understand that he is writing to a particular people in a particular place, in a particular culture, at a particular time, with particular problems, and all of those things are unique and different, sometimes even opposite from us. Whenever we look back on this text, we always have to be looking at it through the lens of a change of cultures, as well as through the distance of time. It's very difficult for us to understand contextually what was going on in that time on the surface. and the suffering that was happening. It's also very difficult for us to understand the culture that is being written to. And so a lot of what we find in First Peter may not be able to be taken one for one to our situations and just be like, all right, here it is. Let's just rip that out and apply it to the context here. What we can hopefully do, if we're not able to do that, is to at least look over their shoulders and see what they prioritized, how they navigated their suffering. We may not be able to take the same answers or the same theology or the same language all of the time that they utilize, but we may be able to somehow or other grasp or ascertain the thinking process that they went through in order to survive their suffering, so that whenever we encounter difficulties, maybe it rises to the level of suffering, maybe it doesn't, we still might be able to follow those same patterns and those same ideas and some of that same thinking in order to navigate our own situations, even though the time is different, the place is different, the situation is different. It may help us turn our bitter into sweet. So, I was talking about this book, and it reminded me this week that I need to send one of these to my aunt, Sheila. I promised that I would send one to her, and I have not yet done so. Now, you may not know my Aunt Sheila, but imagine the most perfect aunt that you could ever imagine, and Sheila is that aunt, especially growing up. She took care of us. She was the fun aunt. She was always the one who was lively and gregarious. She was a storyteller. She could tell a story like nobody's business. And she did a lot to take care of my sister and I in a lot of situations where our parents either weren't there or our parents were there and we just needed somebody else there instead of mom and dad. Sheila babysat for us. All of the parties usually were held at Sheila's house. If I come into town, oftentimes the only person that I will see other than my mom or dad is go and see my Aunt Sheila. That has been the type of person that she was for me. And I was reminded this week as I was finishing up getting this book ready to send out to her that there was this moment whenever I had like skinned up my knee and it wasn't healing great. And I suffered with dry skin a lot as a kid. And she pulls out this green tin that I had never seen before called Bag Balm. And I don't know if you have ever heard of Bag Balm. I had never heard of Bag Balm, but essentially she educated me that it's used for cows' udders during times of extreme cold, whenever their udders become dry and cracked. This balm was designed in Vermont by farmers a long time ago. It's kind of like Vaseline, but it has some other ingredients and things in it. So it's not Vaseline, but if you think of it, it's kind of that same consistency. At least that's what it feels like. So she pulls it out and she puts this on, and this stuff like feels amazing. And it just, to me, was one of those images of who she was. She was always finding ways to heal people, either quite literally through Bag Balm or heal people through just being helpful, providing hospitality, or oftentimes the best healing that my Aunt Sheila did was through joy, through humor, through story, through laughter. So whenever we come to the text today, that thought was on my mind whenever I come to 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. Whenever Peter is again kind of in the middle of this prayer that he's writing to the people who are suffering, he's talking about Jesus, and he's saying, you love Jesus even though you've never seen him. Though you do not see him now, you trust him, and you rejoice with a glorious, inexpressible joy. To me, my Aunt Sheila is a great stand-in for Jesus. I picture Jesus as being gregarious, as being smart, as laughing, as being the type of person who notices an issue, noticing some dry skin or something, and pulls out the Bag Balm out of the robe, and it's the guy who's, rubbing it on. Like, that's how I imagine him, a very loving individual. My Aunt Sheila loved me and I loved her, but I loved her because in a lot of ways, the way that she treated me, she was there for me, she helped me, she healed me. It would be very difficult for me to have that same kind of love for someone whom I had never met or whom I had never seen, who had never been there and done those things for me in the same way. Peter is saying to those who are suffering, don't forget, even though you have never seen Jesus, even though you have never physically been in the presence of Jesus, you still love him and hold him and cling to him. Though you do not see him now, you trust him. And yet, though you've not seen him, though he's not here, you rejoice with a glorious, inexpressible joy. Peter says, you're right where you need to be. You're still holding on to the thing that you need to hold on to. And I'm proud of you for holding on to that thing, for holding on to hope, for holding on to joy, for holding on to love, for holding on to trust. Even in the midst of suffering, you're holding on to this Jesus and the promises that he's given to you. And that's what you need to do. There have been moments in my life where I have felt far from Jesus. I didn't feel like I could see him. I didn't feel like I could feel him. He felt very distant from me in a way that I had never experienced before. And yet I still held on to hope, tried to hang on to some measure of joy, tried to hang on to love and trust in him that even though I might not in this moment see anything but bitter, I still believe that there was sweet, and that sweet was best represented by Jesus. In our times of suffering, that may well be our anchor, the thing that we hold on to. The reward for trusting him, Peter says, there will be a payoff. And this is one of the things that we will continue to see as a theme as we walk through this book of 1 Peter, is that there will come some return on the investment for the suffering that you're enduring. The reward for trusting him, Peter says here, is that it will be salvation for your souls. Now, at first I read this, and it's very easy for me to get very churchy whenever I read things like this, because I see words like trust, and I see words like salvation, and I see words like soul, and I immediately put them in a context, and I think, oh, salvation, that's a prayer, walking an aisle, saying the Romans Road formula. I become very churchy, like it's an action that I do. So my reward for trusting him will be that because I've prayed that prayer, Jesus will follow through. Or because I have served him well, that Jesus will follow through and he will save my soul. So, yeah, yay, Jesus. Great. I endured all the suffering, so my reward is that in the end, you're going to save me. And for a lot of people, that's not enough, right? For a lot of people, that's just not enough. The suffering of this present day does not outweigh this hope, intangible, unseen, who knows what happens in eternity after we die. So, yeah, for a lot of people, trading the misery of the present for some sweet Beulah land, sweet by and by in heaven with harps and clouds, just, it's not good enough for me. I don't want to follow or serve that God. So whenever I see that verse first, that's what my thinking is that salvation is something that I do and that it is really kind of all fulfilled in the future. The reward comes long down the road. But then I remembered Sheila and the bag balm. That bag balm is salve. It soothes, right? You put it on dry and cracked skin and it heals it. Without that salve, S-A-L-V-E, without that salve, there probably wouldn't be healing, or it would take a really long time. And a lot of pain and misery would happen every time the cold or the wet or something hit that skin, right? Salve. The full healing took some time, but the salve made it bearable in the present, right? Isn't that what salve does? Like, it helps promote the healing, but frankly, that's not the goal of salve. The goal of salve is to make the pain, to make the situation endurable, to calm, to soothe. So you may not have known this, or maybe you did. The word salvation in English literally comes from the word salve. In fact, you can see the word salve in the word salvation. So whenever we think about salvation, and this is biblical, if you look at the way salvation is spoken of throughout the text of Scripture, it's really never spoken of, or if so, very rarely, as a future healing or a conclusive thing. It is always in context of a healing along the way, of a journey, of a progression, of something that will be done, but also is being accomplished in the present. It's why the word salvation is used. So whenever and let me just pull this verse back up if I can find it here. So the reward for trusting him will be the salvation of your souls, will be the salving, the soothing of your soul in the present and in the future. That your love and trust, that your joy, all of these things that you are holding on to, these sweet things that you are holding on to in the bitter moments, are salve that are going to help you endure the pain, the turmoil, the chaos, the trauma of the present. So when we begin to see salvation more as salve, we begin to get at the heart of Jesus. We also begin to get at a better understanding of how Peter is encouraging his people to endure suffering and how to navigate so that they are able to survive. Not just in the sweet, not just in the bitter, but in the midst of bittersweet. If you'd like those downloadable resources for this study, all you got to do is go to the URL that is right there, go.christstable.today/bittersweet. It's been good to be with you today. Looking forward to being back with you tomorrow as we continue on this journey. And until that time,